Welcome to one of the most unsettling cases recorded in history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1903, when the first documented disappearances began in Shannon County, Missouri. The dense forests and rolling hills of the Ozarks had always held secrets, but what happened that autumn would cast a shadow over the region that some say persists to this day. The official records merely state that several adults went missing within a 3-month period: loggers, trappers, and a local physician. But what those records fail to mention is far more disturbing than what they include. Our story begins with the discovery of an abandoned cabin near the Current River, approximately 15 miles from the small settlement of Eminence. A mail carrier named Thomas Whitley discovered the cabin on October 14, 1903, while taking an alternate route due to flooding. According to his sworn statement filed with the Shannon County Sheriff's Office, he found the door standing open, a pot of stew still on the cold stove, and no sign of the occupant, a trapper named Elias Woodward, who had lived in the region for nearly 20 years. What made Whitley's discovery peculiar wasn't just the abandoned meal, but what he described as a profound sense of wrongness about the scene. Nothing was overturned or broken. There were no signs of struggle. Yet Woodward's hunting rifle remained mounted above the fireplace, something locals noted he would never have left behind voluntarily. Most disturbing was the journal found open on the table with an entry that simply read, "They're moving through the hollow again tonight. The sound is different this time." The county dispatched Deputy Marshal Fleming to investigate, but after a 3-day search, no trace of Woodward was found. The case might have been dismissed as just another mountain man who had moved on, if not for what happened in the weeks that followed. November 3, 1903. Dr. Samuel Hawthorne, the only physician serving Eminence and the surrounding townships, failed to return from a house call to a remote farmstead. His horse returned alone 2 days later, saddlebags still containing his medical instruments. The horse appeared uninjured, but was described as skittish and lathered, despite having had ample time to calm down during its journey home. According to the deputy's report, Dr. Hawthorne had been summoned to the Jenkins farm, some 12 miles northwest of town, to attend to the elderly Mrs. Jenkins, who was suffering from pneumonia. The deputy interviewed Mr. Jenkins, who confirmed the doctor had arrived, treated his wife, and departed shortly before dusk, heading back toward Eminence. The route between the Jenkins farm and town was well established, a dirt road that followed the ridgeline for most of its length before descending into the river valley. There were few places where a traveler might inadvertently take a wrong turn. Yet somewhere along those 12 miles, Dr. Hawthorne had vanished. A search party followed the road and then expanded outward, covering the adjacent hollows and hillsides. They found no body, no medical bag, no hat or coat, or any personal effect that might have belonged to the missing physician. The only unusual discovery was made by John Bradshaw, a local hunter who had joined the search. Approximately 7 miles from town, at a point where the road passed close to a deep ravine locally known as Baker's Hollow, Bradshaw found a pocket watch lying in the middle of the road. The watch belonged to Dr. Hawthorne. His initials were engraved on the case. The watch was intact, still ticking. The hand stopped at 5:17. Baker's Hollow had a certain reputation among locals. It was said that sounds carried strangely there, voices sometimes echoing when they shouldn't, or being swallowed entirely by the dense foliage. Some claimed to have heard whispers when passing through alone, even when no one else was present for miles. Most travelers avoided the hollow if they could, especially after dark. Deputy Fleming noted in his report that the search of the hollow was cursory due to difficult terrain, a curious statement given that several members of the search party were experienced woodsmen who regularly hunted far more challenging landscapes. November 17th. Brothers Caleb and Joseph Thornton, loggers working for the Missouri Lumber Company, didn't report back to their camp after heading out to mark trees along Jack's Fork River. Their axes and saws were later found neatly arranged at the base of a sycamore tree miles from where they had been assigned to work. The Thornton brothers were experienced woodsmen, having worked for the lumber company for nearly 8 years. They were known for their reliability and knowledge of the forest. The foreman, William Haskell, told the sheriff that he had sent them to mark a stand of white oak about 2 miles east of the main camp. When they failed to return by nightfall, he assumed they had sought shelter in one of the small huts the company maintained throughout their territory. It wasn't until the following day, when they still hadn't appeared, that he organized a search. The search party followed the Thorntons' trail easily at first. Their boot prints were distinctive, and they had blazed trees as they went, following company procedure. But approximately 1.5 miles from camp, the trail changed. The blazes stopped, and the footprints began to wander, no longer following a logical path toward the white oak stand. Instead, they veered south toward a series of limestone bluffs overlooking a tributary of the Jack's Fork. The most peculiar aspect, as noted in Haskell's statement to the sheriff, was that the footprints suggested the brothers were no longer walking together. Their paths diverged and converged repeatedly, as if they were searching for something, or perhaps for each other. At some points, the tracks showed they had been running. The trail led to the edge of the tributary, then followed the water downstream for nearly 3 miles before ascending a steep hillside to a clearing dominated by an ancient sycamore tree. At the base of this tree, the search party found the brothers' equipment: 2 axes, a pair of saws, marking paint, and their lunch pails, the food inside untouched. The tools had been arranged in a precise pattern, the axes forming a cross, the saws perpendicular to them, the paint cans at the 4 corners of the resulting square. This deliberate arrangement disturbed the searchers far more than a sign of struggle would have. The footprints ended at the clearing, despite expanding the search for several miles in all directions. No further trace of the Thornton brothers was ever found. December 5th, Miranda Hollis, proprietor of the only general store in the small settlement of Kincaid, locked her establishment at dusk, but never arrived at her sister's house where she was expected for supper. The distance between the 2 buildings was less than 300 yards. Miss Hollis was a widow in her 50s, respected in the community, and known for her punctuality. According to her sister, Abigail Wheeler, Miranda closed the store every evening at precisely 5 a.m., secured the cash box in the small safe behind the counter, and walked the short distance to Abigail's house for their shared evening meal. On December 5th, Abigail saw the store lights extinguished at the usual time. When Miranda hadn't arrived by 5:15, she sent her son Thomas to check on his aunt. Thomas found the store locked, the lamps out. Through the front window, he could see that the display counters had been covered with cloths as they were. Each night, everything appeared to be in order. Thinking his aunt might have stopped to speak with a neighbor, he returned home. By 6 o'clock, with no sign of Miranda and all the nearby houses checked, Abigail's concern had grown into alarm. The sheriff was summoned from Eminence, arriving the next morning. His examination of the store revealed nothing unusual. The day's receipts were in the safe. Miranda's coat and hat were missing from their hooks by the door, suggesting she had indeed left the building, intending to walk to her sister's house. The only unusual detail, noted but dismissed in the initial report, was a faint, unfamiliar odor in the store, metallic, almost like a thunderstorm approaching. According to Deputy Fleming, the ground between the store and Abigail's house was searched inch by inch. It had rained lightly the previous day, and the soil was soft enough to hold footprints. Miranda's distinctive button boots had left clear impressions leading from the store's front door, down the 3 wooden steps, and onto the packed earth street. The tracks proceeded normally for about 50 yards, then stopped abruptly in the middle of the road. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of other footprints approaching or leaving the area, no evidence that she had fallen or been dragged away. It was as if Miranda Hollis had simply ceased to exist between one step and the next. By Christmas of 1903, the residents of Shannon County had fallen into a state of collective unease. No bodies had been found. No evidence of violence had been discovered, yet 4 adults had simply vanished from a sparsely populated region where everyone knew everyone else's business. The official investigation, limited by the resources of a rural sheriff's office at the turn of the century, produced little beyond speculation and rumor. What makes these disappearances particularly notable was the peculiar silence that followed. According to the Shannon County Gazette, dated January 16, 1904, an unspoken agreement seems to have fallen over the good people of our county to avoid discussion of the recent unfortunate incidents. The newspaper never mentioned the disappearances again. This silence extended beyond the newspaper. Church records from the period, normally detailed in their accounts of community events, including deaths, illnesses, and misfortunes, contain no mention of the missing persons. School records show that children of some of the disappeared, Dr. Hawthorne had 2 sons and Caleb Thornton a daughter, were withdrawn and presumably relocated, but with no documentation of where they went or with whom. Most telling was the absence of continued official investigation. The Shannon County Sheriff's records show that the cases were never formally closed, yet no further action was taken after January 1904. No wanted posters were circulated for the missing, no rewards were offered for information. When pressed by a reporter from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch who had heard rumors of the disappearances, Sheriff William Cunningham reportedly stated, "There's nothing to investigate. Sometimes people just move on without telling anyone. That's their right in a free country." It would be 53 years before anyone would take a serious interest in what happened during those autumn months of 1903. In 1956, Professor Walter Kincaid of Missouri State University began researching what he initially believed would be a straightforward historical study of Ozark folklore. What he uncovered instead was a pattern of similar incidents stretching back decades before the 1903 disappearances and continuing, albeit with less frequency, until at least 1932. Kincaid's research notes, archived at the University Library in Springfield, document his growing obsession with the case. The silence surrounding these events is not merely unusual. It appears deliberate and coordinated, he wrote in 1957. County records show gaps precisely where information about these incidents should be. Church registries omit deaths. Family Bibles have pages removed. Through painstaking cross-referencing of various historical documents, Kincaid identified at least 17 cases between 1885 and 1932 that followed the same pattern as the 1903 disappearances. Individuals vanishing without trace from rural areas of Shannon County, minimal official investigation, and a curious lack of community response or ongoing concern. The incidents appeared to cluster in 3 distinct time periods: 1885, 1887, 1903, 1904, and 1931-1932, with each cluster involving 4 to 6 individuals. Kincaid began to map the locations, noting that while the disappearances occurred throughout the county, they were concentrated along the watersheds of the Current and Jack's Fork rivers, particularly in areas with cave systems or deep hollows. He became increasingly convinced that some geographical or geological feature of these areas was connected to the disappearances. The most disturbing discovery came when Kincaid located Elias Woodward's journal, not just the single page left open on the table, but the complete volume, which had somehow been separated from the official evidence and was in the possession of a retired deputy's widow. The entries leading up to Woodward's disappearance described increasing anxiety about sounds in the forest at night, particularly around an area locals called the Dead Hollow, a narrow ravine approximately 3 miles from his cabin. October 9th. Heard it again last night, not like an animal, more like something heavy being dragged over stones, but rhythmic-like. Always stops at the edge of the clearing. Jenkins from over Ellington Way used to talk about something similar before he took off last year. Wonder now if he really did take off like everyone said. October 11th. Found strange marks on the trees down by the spring today, not like any blaze I've seen before, almost like writing, but no letters I recognize. Similar marks on the rocks, too. Recent. The soil underneath was still damp when I brushed it aside. October 12th. Spent the day tracking whatever's been. Moving around my clearing at night. Found a trail leading toward the Dead Hollow. Not like any animal track I know, wide, like something being dragged, but even purposeful. Followed it about a mile before the feeling came over me that I shouldn't go any further. Can't explain it. Like suddenly knowing you're being watched. Headed back to the cabin and found my door standing open, though I know I latched it. Nothing missing, nothing disturbed. But something had been there. The air inside was cold, colder, than outside, and had that same metallic smell I noticed by the spring. October 13th. They're moving through the hollow again tonight. The sound is different this time, closer. I barred the door, but I don't think it would stop them. If they decided to come in, the lantern keeps going dim, though there's plenty of oil. Something's watching from the edge of the trees. I can feel it. And then nothing. The final entry, exactly as Thomas Whitley had described finding it. The journal contained earlier mentions of the Dead Hollow, describing it as a place locals avoided. According to Woodward's notes, it had earned its name not from any known deaths, but from the unusual lack of wildlife in and around it. No bird's nest there, he wrote in an entry, dated June 1902. No deer browse its edges. Even the insects seem fewer. The old-timers say it's always been that way, long as anyone can remember. Kincaid expanded his investigation, interviewing elderly residents who had been children or young adults in 1903. Most refused to speak about the disappearances directly. Those who did speak often did so on condition that their names not be recorded. One anonymous source, described only as a female, aged approximately 82, told Kincaid, "Those who talk about what happens in the hollows end up being talked about themselves, and then they aren't talked about ever again." Another elderly resident, a man who had worked for the Missouri Lumber Company at the same time as the Thornton brothers, spoke more directly, but still refused to allow Kincaid to record his name. "There are places in these hills that don't belong to us," he said. "Never did. The Indians knew it. They left markers, warnings. White folks tore them down, plowed them under, thought they knew better. But the hills remember what belongs to them." When Kincaid asked what he meant by "belong to them," the man fell silent for several minutes before responding, "Not everything that walks these woods walks on the same ground we do. Sometimes the worlds get thin between each other. Sometimes things cross over that shouldn't, and sometimes people cross over too, willing or not." The professor's notes show increasing frustration with the wall of silence he encountered. Yet he persisted, traveling throughout Shannon, Carter, and Oregon counties, collecting fragments of stories, rumors, and folklore that he believed might connect to the 1903 incidents. He began mapping locations of all reported disappearances, abandonment of homesteads, and what he termed perception anomalies. Instances where multiple witnesses reported unusual sensory experiences in specific locations. A pattern emerged centered around the watersheds of the Current and Jack's Fork rivers. The highest concentration of incidents occurred near cave systems and deep hollows, away from established settlements. Kincaid became particularly interested in an area approximately 20 miles southwest of Eminence, where several tributaries converged, creating a landscape of steep ravines and isolated valleys, difficult to access except on foot. In the spring of 1958, Kincaid took a leave of absence from the university to conduct field research in this area. He established a base camp near what local maps identified as Blowing Cave and planned to spend 6 weeks documenting the terrain and collecting oral histories from the few isolated homesteads in the vicinity. 2 weeks into his expedition, his regular correspondence with his department chair abruptly ceased. When university officials finally organized a search party in late May, they found his camp intact but abandoned. His journal, camera, and field notes were missing. The only unusual item recovered was a small leather pouch containing soil samples from different locations, each carefully labeled with coordinates. Analysis of these samples at the university laboratory revealed nothing unusual beyond what would be expected of forest soil from the region. The search for Professor Kincaid was eventually abandoned after no trace of him could be found. His disappearance was officially attributed to misadventure in difficult terrain, possibly a fall from one of the many bluffs in the area. The true story of what happened to Walter Kincaid might have remained buried in university archives if not for a curious discovery made during the construction of the Ozark National Scenic Riverways Park in 1963. Workers clearing land for a ranger stationed near Round Spring uncovered what appeared to be the remains of an old root cellar or storage pit. Inside, protected from the elements in a metal ammunition box, they found a water-damaged but still legible journal, along with several rolls of exposed but undeveloped film. The journal belonged to Walter Kincaid. The entries dated from his final expedition and continued for nearly 2 weeks after his supposed disappearance. The National Park Service forwarded the materials to the university, but by then, interest in Kincaid's research had waned. The journal was cataloged and filed. Away with his other papers, the film was never developed, reportedly due to its deteriorated condition. It wasn't until 1967 that a graduate student named Eleanor Marsh, researching a thesis on Ozark cultural geography, discovered Kincaid's recovered journal. What she read led her to assemble all of his scattered research into the first comprehensive study of what she termed the Shannon County anomalies. Kincaid's final journal entries paint a disturbing picture of his last days in the field. Initially clinical and objective, his writing style gradually shifted, becoming increasingly paranoid and disjointed. He described finding a series of caves that didn't appear on any geological survey, with unusual acoustical properties that made sounds from deep within seem to originate from behind the listener. May 10th, unusual rock formations approximately 2.3 miles northeast of camp, not natural, arranged in concentric circles, largest stones on the outside, smallest in center. No tool marks visible, but precision of placement suggests deliberate construction. No mention of such structures in any survey or local account. Took photographs and soil samples from center of formation. May 11th, returned to stone formation. At dawn. Different alignment of shadows reveals additional structures not visible yesterday. Smaller concentric circles radiating from main formation along lines precisely aligned with cardinal directions. Possible astronomical purpose. Took additional photographs from elevated position in nearby tree to capture complete layout. Noticed unusual sound qualities within the central circle. My footsteps produced no echo despite stone surfaces, but voice seemed to reverberate from below rather than around. Soil at center feels different, more dense, almost vibratory when pressed firmly. May 12th, visited the McClintock homestead today, abandoned now for almost 30 years, according to local accounts. Strange that a property with good water and relatively flat tillable land would remain unoccupied so long. The McClintocks left sometime in the winter of 1932-33. No record of where they relocated. Structures still surprisingly sound. Found children's toys, kitchen implements, clothing, as if they departed in great haste. Most unusual, all mirrors in the house had been broken and the pieces buried in a small pit behind the barn. May 13th. Found an old man living about 3 miles from the McClintock place. Refuses to give his name, but claims to have known the family. Says they began to see things in the mirrors that shouldn't have been there in the weeks before they left. Claims the youngest child started speaking to his reflection as if it was someone else. When I asked where the family went, he became agitated, saying only, "They didn't go nowhere. They're still here, just not here like we are." He refused to elaborate and asked me to leave. May 14th. The sounds begin approximately 1 hour after sunset each night. Not animal, not human, directionally inconsistent, seems to come simultaneously from multiple locations. During daylight hours, repeated instances of what appears to be movement at the periphery of vision, but nothing visible when looking directly. Temperature drops in certain locations without apparent cause. Left markers at these spots for further investigation. May 15th. Followed the cold spots like a trail leading southwest from camp. They form a straight line despite uneven terrain, cutting across ridges and hollows without deviation. The line leads to a limestone bluff overlooking a small, unnamed tributary of the current. At the base of the bluff, hidden behind dense undergrowth, found what appears to be an entrance. Not a natural cave mouth, but a constructed passage. The stone lintel above the opening bears symbols, similar to those Woodward described. Didn't have adequate light to explore further. Will return tomorrow better equipped. May 16th. Found the entrance today, not natural. Stone lintel and worked passage extending approximately 60 feet before opening into larger chamber. Walls lined with symbols similar to those described in Woodward's journal. Air quality poor, strange odor, metallic taste. Limited exploration due to inadequate light sources. Will return tomorrow with additional equipment. May 17th. They know I'm here now. Found all my markers rearranged this morning. Someone or something entered my tent while I slept. Nothing taken, but journal moved from field desk to bedside. The McClintock place is watching me when I watch it. Cannot explain. Will relocate camp closer to cave entrance for efficiency of exploration. May 18th. Spent the day photographing symbols in the entrance passage. They change slightly as one moves deeper, subtle variations in what initially appear to be repetitive patterns. Brought samples of the unusual soil from the stone circle and scattered it at the cave entrance. Immediate reaction. Soil appeared to be absorbed into the stone floor much faster than natural percolation would allow. Temperature inside the cave dropped noticeably for several minutes afterward. May 19th. The descent is significant. Mapped. 3 levels so far. The symbols change on each level, becoming more complex, more precise. Evidence of tool use in the lower chambers, but not any methodology I recognize. Found remains of fires, ancient, but preserved in the dry air. Carbon dating would be instructive. The acoustics change in the lower chamber. Sounds from above distorted, elongated. My own voice echoes back, changed. May 20th. Discovered what appears to be a ceremonial space on the 4th level down. Circular chamber approximately 30 feet in diameter, floor recessed in center, forming shallow bowl. Walls covered entirely in symbols, but different from those in upper passages, more pictographic. They seem to tell a story, though I cannot interpret it yet. Ceiling painted with what might be a star map, but the constellations depicted do not match our night sky. The air here is different, thicker, charged. Somehow my equipment malfunctions. Compass spins, watch runs backwards, time feels wrong. May 21st. They're coming up from below now. I hear them at night, moving through the passages. The symbols respond to their presence. Not phosphorescent exactly, but visible in complete darkness. I've sealed the tent as best I can, but the smell permeates everything now. Metallic, antiseptic, wrong. May 22nd. Cannot return to the surface. The way back shifts. Passages that led down now lead sideways. Maps, useless. Compass spins. I left markers, but they've been moved. Someone is leaving food at the periphery of my camp. Not animals. Prepared. Food. They want me to stay. They want me to go deeper. The symbols make more sense now. Not a language exactly. More like music transcribed. They need to be spoken aloud, to be understood. The journal ends abruptly mid-entry on May 23rd with a scrawled note. The walls are listening. They always were. Shannon County doesn't have secrets. It is the secret. I understand now why some stories shouldn't be told, why some doors shouldn't be opened. If you're reading this, burn it. Fill the entrance. Forget this place. Exit. Eleanor Marsh became convinced that Kincaid had discovered something significant, perhaps evidence of a pre-Columbian culture unknown to archaeology or a geological anomaly that created unusual perceptual effects. She spent the summer of 1967 attempting to retrace his steps using the coordinates found in his notes and the soil sample labels. Unlike Kincaid, Marsh took the precaution of checking in daily with a colleague by radio. On August 14, 1967, during what was to be her final week of field research, she reported finding what might be the stone circle formation Kincaid had described. Her transmission was briefly interrupted by static, then resumed with Marsh describing unusual acoustic properties in the area. Normal sounds becoming muffled, while distant sounds seemed unusually clear. Her final transmission came at 7:43 p.m. that evening. The recording, preserved in the university archives, contains mostly static with Marsh's voice, faintly audible, saying, "Something's happening to the equipment. Batteries draining. Can you hear that? That sound?" It's exactly as Kincaid described. Coming from everywhere at once. I'm returning to base camp. We'll contact again in the morning. If anyone comes looking, tell them to bring extra batteries. And wait, there's someone at the edge of the clearing. Hello? Hello? Can you help me? My equipment is... Wait, how did you... The symbols. You're wearing the transmission ends with a burst of static. A search party found Marsh's camp 2 days later. Like Kincaid's, it was intact but abandoned. Her field journal was opened on her camp table, the final entry describing her discovery of the stone formation and noting unusual equipment malfunctions in its vicinity. The search was more extensive than the one conducted for Kincaid, involving local law enforcement, park rangers, and university staff. Despite efforts that continued for nearly 2 weeks, no trace of Eleanor Marsh was ever found. The university subsequently classified all materials related to both Kincaid's and Marsh's research as restricted, citing concerns about encouraging unsafe solo expeditions in difficult terrain. The official position, as stated in a memo from the Dean of Research dated October 3, 1967, was that both researchers likely met with unfortunate accidents in a wilderness area known for dangerous sinkholes, unstable cave systems, and confusing topography. Interestingly, the memo went on to discourage further research in the specific region where both had disappeared, suggesting that scholarly attention might be more productively directed toward other aspects of Ozark history and geography. The Boise University declined several subsequent requests from other institutions to access the materials, including a formal inquiry from the Smithsonian in 1972 regarding Kincaid's photographs of the stone formations. For nearly 40 years, the Shannon County Disappearances of 1903 and the subsequent vanishings of those who investigated them remained buried in archives and local memory. The creation of the Ozark National Scenic Riverways Park increased tourism to the region, but most visitors remained on or near the rivers, unaware of what might lie in the more remote hollows and ridges. In the 1990s, as older parks records were digitized, a curious pattern emerged. Several areas within the park boundaries were designated as off-limits to regular ranger patrols, ostensibly due to unstable terrain or sensitive ecological zones. These restricted areas, when mapped, formed a rough circle approximately 20 miles in diameter, centered on the location where Kincaid and later Marsh had disappeared. Park administration, when questioned about these restrictions by a journalist in 1997, stated that they were based on standard safety protocols and refused further comment. In 2003, exactly 100 years after the original disappearances, journalist Michael Forrester began researching a book on unsolved mysteries of the Ozarks. Through a Freedom of Information Act request, he obtained access to the previously restricted materials from Missouri State University regarding the Kincaid and Marsh expeditions. Forrester's notes, later published as an appendix to his book, Whispers in the Hollows, Unsolved Mysteries of the Ozarks, expressed surprise at the university's continued reluctance to release the materials despite the passage of decades. The archival staff seemed unusually concerned about these particular documents. He wrote, "One senior archivist warned me off the record that I might not want to look too closely at this particular rabbit hole. When pressed, she would only say that I wasn't the first person to request these materials, and that those who dig into Shannon County tend not to write about it afterward." The most significant discovery Forrester made wasn't in the official documentation, but in an unmarked envelope filed with Marsh's personal effects. It contained several developed photographs, apparently from one of the rolls of film found with Kincaid's recovered journal. Despite the poor quality and deterioration of the images, they clearly showed the stone formation he had described along, with the entrance to what appeared to be a man-made, or at least man-modified, cave. More disturbing were 3 photographs taken inside the cave system. Despite the limitations of 1950s flash photography in such an environment, they showed chambers, walls covered with intricate symbols, unlike any known Native American pictographs or petroglyphs. The final photograph, badly overexposed but still discernible, showed what appeared to be a human figure at a significant distance down a tunnel. The figure was oddly proportioned and positioned, but in a way that suggested it was either climbing along the wall rather than walking, or was photographed in mid-fall. Forrester consulted with several anthropologists and archaeologists sharing copies of the photographs. None could identify the symbols as belonging to any known cultural tradition. Dr. Rebecca Lehman of the University of Chicago noted that while some elements resembled Mississippian or earlier woodland period designs, the overall pattern and organization was entirely novel and unusually complex, suggesting either an unknown indigenous culture or, more troublingly, a sophisticated hoax. Forrester attempted to locate the sites shown in the photographs, consulting with geologists and national park rangers familiar with the area. None could identify the specific locations. Several suggested that some of the terrain features didn't match any known formations within the current boundaries of Shannon County, despite the coordinates in Kincaid's notes clearly placing them there. After several months of research, including interviews with elderly residents who remembered the legend surrounding the 1903 disappearances, Forrester decided to conduct his own field expedition. Unlike his predecessors, he assembled a team of 4 people: himself, a professional guide familiar with the Ozarks, a geologist specializing in cave systems, and a photographer with experience documenting archaeological sites. They entered the backcountry in early October 2003, planning a 2-week expedition to locate the sites described in Kincaid's and Marsh's notes. Their satellite phone allowed them to check in with Forrester's publisher every evening. For the first week, these calls were routine, reporting difficult terrain but no unusual findings. On the 8th day, October 17th, Forrester reported that they had found what might be the stone formation. His description matched Kincaid's concentric circles of stones, largest on the outside, smallest in the center. The formation was partially obscured by a century of forest growth, with trees now standing within the circles that would have been saplings or not yet sprouted in 1903. The geologist on the team, Dr. Lynn Weaver from the University of Missouri, noted that the stone showed no evidence of glacial deposition and had clearly been transported to the location and arranged deliberately. Carbon dating of soil samples taken from beneath several of the stones later indicated they had been placed there approximately 900 years earlier, long before European settlement, but more recent than most known Native American structures in the region. During this call, Forrester mentioned that his photographer, Sarah Mitchell, had experienced equipment malfunctions similar to those described by Kincaid and Marsh. Her digital cameras would suddenly power down despite having full batteries, and when they did work, many of the images later proved to be corrupted or completely black. She had resorted to using mechanical film cameras as backup. The October 18th check-in was delayed by several hours, finally coming at nearly midnight. Forrester sounded excited, reporting that they had located what appeared to be the cave entrance. Described by Kincaid, he described it as architecturally sophisticated, with a stone lintel supporting a passage that showed evidence of tool work. The team planned to begin documenting and exploring the system the following day. There was no check-in on October 19th. When attempts to reach the team via satellite phone failed, Forrester's publisher contacted local authorities. A search and rescue operation began on the morning of October 20th, using the coordinates from the previous check-in as a starting point. The search team located the expedition's camp on the afternoon of October 21st. As with Kincaid and Marsh decades earlier, it was intact but abandoned. 4 tents were still standing, with sleeping bags and personal belongings inside. The campfire had been extinguished properly. A table held open notebooks, maps, and photographic equipment. The satellite phone was found in Forrester's tent, fully charged but powered off. The only sign of disturbance was at the edge of the campsite furthest from the fire ring. There, the ground showed evidence of multiple sets of footprints leading away into the forest. But according to the search team's tracker, the unusual aspect of the prints was their pattern. They showed 4 people walking in a staggered line, maintaining exactly the same distance from one another, never breaking formation, even when navigating around trees or over difficult terrain. The tracker described it as more like a military drill than a group of civilians moving through the woods. The footprints led almost a mile through dense forest before abruptly disappearing at the edge of a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a single stone, approximately 3 feet high, similar to those described in the concentric circle formation, but standing alone. The search team found no cave entrance, no stone circles, and no further sign of Forrester or his companions. One search team member, a park ranger who asked not to be identified in later reports, described finding a small digital voice recorder at the base of the standing stone. He claimed that when he activated it, he heard only static for several minutes, followed by a single sentence in what he believed to be Forrester's voice saying, "We understand now. We're going deeper. Don't follow." The ranger reported turning the device over to the sheriff's department, but it was not listed in any official inventory of items recovered from the scene. The search continued for 12 days before being scaled back and eventually abandoned as winter weather approached. Like the others before them, Michael Forrester, Lynn Weaver, Thomas Burns, the guide, and Sarah Mitchell, the photographer, had vanished without explanation in the remote forests of Shannon County. The materials Forrester had gathered during his research were published posthumously in 2005 as Whispers in the Hollows, but with a significant editorial note explaining that certain sections had been withheld at the request of both the Shannon County Sheriff's Department and Missouri State University. The book presents the historical facts of the various disappearances, but offers no conclusions about their cause. A former editor at the publishing house, speaking anonymously to a paranormal research website in 2008, claimed that nearly a third of the original text was removed before publication, including detailed descriptions of the symbols Kincaid had photographed, precise coordinates for several locations Forrester had identified as thin spots or transition zones, and transcripts of interviews with Shannon County residents who spoke of the others, or the quiet people, who inhabited certain hollows. What is not widely known is that the published version of the book differs substantially from Forrester's original manuscript. According to this editor, the decision to redact this material came after a visit from two individuals who identified themselves as representatives of the Department of the Interior, concerned about the book's potential to encourage trespassing in dangerous and ecologically sensitive areas of the Ozark National Scenic Riverways. The editor described these visitors as unusually insistent and noted that they seemed less concerned with potential trespassing than with the specific information being published about the symbols and locations. One of the excised sections, allegedly leaked online in 2012, though its authenticity has never been verified, contains Forrester's speculation about the nature of what might be happening in Shannon County. He draws parallels between the Ozark disappearances and similar phenomena reported in other wilderness areas around the world, places where people vanish without explanation, where strange sounds are heard, where time and perception seem to function differently. What if certain landscapes aren't merely physical, the purported text reads? What if they're intersections, points where our reality overlaps with something else? The indigenous peoples who lived in these regions before European settlement understood this. Their folklore is filled with warnings about specific places, caves, hollows, certain mountains or valleys, where the boundaries between worlds thin or dissolve entirely. Modern rationality has dismissed these as superstitions, but the pattern of disappearances suggests otherwise. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire century-long mystery is how little attention it has received outside of the immediately affected region. National media gave only passing notice to the 2003 disappearances despite the unusual circumstances and connection to historical cases. Academic interest has been similarly muted, with no major university or research institution sponsoring further investigation after the Forrester expedition. Local attitudes toward the incidents remain guarded. A 2006 oral history project conducted by the Missouri Historical Society attempted to collect accounts of the disappearances from longtime Shannon County residents. The project director noted in her final report that subjects displayed unusual reticence when discussion turned to specific locations associated with the incidents. Several interviews were terminated by participants when questions became too directed. One elderly subject warned that some parts of the county don't belong. To us, never did, and those who go looking for them don't come back. The creation of the Ozark National Scenic Riverways as a protected federal park in 1964 placed much of the area associated with the disappearances under National Park Service jurisdiction. In 2007, responding to Freedom of Information Act requests from several journalists following up on Forrester's work, the Park Service acknowledged that certain remote areas of the park were marked as restricted on internal maps, with rangers advised not to conduct solo patrols there. The official explanation cited unstable karst topography presenting sinkhole hazards. A retired park ranger, Howard Jenkins, who worked in the Ozark National Scenic Riverways from 1969 to 1992, provided a more candid assessment in a local newspaper. Interview in 2008. There are places in the backcountry where the radio doesn't work, he said. Places where your GPS will tell you you're miles from where you know you are. Places where compasses spin and watches run fast or slow. We were told to stay on established trails and to always work in pairs in certain areas. No one ever explained exactly why, but those of us who'd been there a while understood you'd feel it when you got close to one of those places. A kind of pressure in your head, a feeling of being watched. Smart rangers turned around when they felt that. Jenkins went on to describe an incident in 1978 when 2 hikers were reported missing in a remote area near Blowing Cave. We found their campsite 3 days later. Everything was there: tent, sleeping bags, food, water, even their wallets and car keys. But no people, no signs of animal attack or struggle. I was part of that search team. And I'll tell you something I've never told anyone else. We all heard voices that night coming from different directions, sometimes sounding like they were right behind us, sometimes like they were calling from miles away. The voices sounded like the missing hikers calling for help, but every time we'd head toward one, it would stop, and another would start from a completely different direction. The hikers were never found, and Jenkins claimed the incident was officially documented as a probable case of abandonment, the theory being that the hikers had staged their disappearance for unknown reasons. That's how it always went, he said. There was always some rational explanation put on paper, but those of us who were out there knew different. What actually happened in the forests and hollows of Shannon County in 1903, and what continues to happen to those who investigate too deeply, remains one of the most enduring and least publicized mysteries in American history. The disappearances follow a pattern not just in their execution, but in how they're received and remembered. They occur in remote locations, leave no evidence of violence or struggle, and are followed by a collective silence that seems to extend beyond the local population to institutional and media responses. Some have suggested a connection to the area's unique geology. The Ozarks contain some of the most extensive and complex cave systems in the United States. The landscape is riddled with sinkholes, underground streams, and natural tunnels created by water dissolving the limestone bedrock over millions of years. Perhaps, the theory goes, some of these caves connect to particularly deep or extensive systems where individuals might become lost or trapped. But this fails to explain the consistent absence of bodies, the lack of distress calls or evidence of survival attempts, the peculiar arrangement of abandoned possessions, and, most significantly, the apparent institutional reluctance to investigate thoroughly or publicize the incidents. Others point to the region's long history of isolation and self-reliance, suggesting that the disappearances might involve human agency, perhaps a secretive community or cult that has developed in the remote hollows, occasionally abducting outsiders for unknown purposes. This theory gained some credence from historical records, showing that the Ozarks have repeatedly served as a refuge for groups seeking to escape societal oversight, from Civil War deserters to Prohibition-era moonshiners to modern isolationists. But again, the pattern seems too consistent over too long a period, involving too many different locations across too broad an area to be the work of a single human group. And it fails to explain how people could be taken without struggle from their homes, from well-traveled roads, from the middle of logging camps, or how experienced researchers with modern equipment could vanish without trace. The most unsettling explanation, and the one that most closely aligns with the fragmented accounts and local folklore, is also the most difficult to reconcile with modern understanding that there is something fundamentally unusual about certain locations within Shannon County, something that affects perception, physical laws, or the very fabric of reality in ways that occasionally result in people transitioning, willingly or unwillingly, from our world to somewhere else. As outlandish as this might sound to contemporary ears, it's worth noting that indigenous cultures throughout the world share remarkably similar concepts of thin places or portals, where the boundary between worlds can be crossed under certain conditions. The Osage and other tribes who once inhabited the Ozark region left behind oral traditions warning of specific locations where the unwary might be taken by entities they variously described as shadow people or the quiet ones, those who visit. Shannon County today will find a landscape of extraordinary natural beauty. The Current and Jack's Fork rivers wind through forested hills, flowing over gravel bars and past towering bluffs. Canoeists and kayakers travel the waterways in summer. Hikers explore the marked trails that follow ridgelines and connect designated campgrounds. Few venture into the more remote hollows that lie between the rivers where cell phone signals fade. And the forest grows unusually dense and silent. Locals are happy to direct tourists to the scenic overlooks, the best fishing spots, and the historic grist mills that dot the region. Ask them about the stone circles or certain caves, however, and the conversation quickly turns to other subjects. Some will simply state that those places don't exist. Others might acknowledge the stories, but dismiss them as old legends not worth repeating. A few might offer a warning, gentle but firm, that some parts of the Ozarks are best left unexplored. A particularly telling incident occurred in 2012, when a film crew from a paranormal investigation television show attempted to shoot an episode about the Shannon County disappearances. According to a production assistant who later discussed the experience online, the crew encountered an unusual level of non-cooperation from local officials and residents. Interview subjects who had initially agreed to participate canceled at the last minute. Permits for filming in certain areas of the national park were denied without explanation. Equipment malfunctioned with unusual frequency. The final straw came when the crew's vehicles were vandalized while parked outside a local restaurant. Not with the typical smashed windows or slashed tires, but in a more pointed manner. Each vehicle had the same symbol carved into its hood, a pattern of concentric circles with a single line bisecting them, remarkably similar to descriptions of the symbols found in Kincaid's photographs. No one claimed responsibility. No witnesses came forward, and the sheriff's investigation concluded without identifying any suspects. The crew left the next day. The episode was never produced. In 2018, a group of hikers discovered a small metal container while exploring an unmarked trail approximately 3 miles from the official Blowing Cave Trail in the national park. Inside was a tightly rolled paper that proved to be a hand-drawn map of what appeared to be a cave system, with annotations in what experts later identified as Eleanor Marsh's handwriting. The map showed a series of chambers and passages not documented in any official geological survey of the area. Most peculiarly, the map was dated August 16, 1967, 2 days after Marsh's final radio transmission and disappearance. At the bottom was a brief note. "If found, please understand. I wasn't taken. I chose to go. The others are not what we think. The symbols are an invitation, not a warning. But once you cross, there's no coming back the same." The hikers turned the map over to park authorities. According to public statements, it was forwarded to the University of Missouri for authentication and study. No further information has been released, and subsequent Freedom of Information Act requests regarding the map have been denied on grounds of ongoing investigation. In 2022, a spelunking enthusiast exploring the less visited caverns near Alley Spring captured what might be the only photographic evidence related to the disappearances. While reviewing images taken deep within a narrow side passage, she noticed what appeared to be fresh tool marks on a seemingly natural rock face. Returning with better lighting equipment, she discovered that the rock face concealed a narrow opening that had been deliberately obscured. Beyond this opening, she found a small chamber with walls covered in symbols matching those described in Kincaid's journal and visible in the few preserved photographs from his expedition. She took extensive photographs and video before prudently retreating without further exploration. Upon returning to the surface, she found that most of her digital images were corrupted, showing only static or solid black frames. Only a single photograph remained intact, showing a wall covered with intricate, interlocking circular patterns surrounding what appeared to be a stylized human figure with elongated limbs. the spelunker reported her discovery to park authorities and posted the surviving photograph online. Within hours, the image was removed from multiple platforms for community standard violations. Despite containing nothing objectively offensive, the spelunker herself has declined further interviews, stating only that she no longer wishes to discuss the incident and has decided to pursue other hobbies. And perhaps they're right. Some mysteries persist, not because they cannot be solved, but because solving them would require us to confront realities we're not prepared to accept. The forests of Shannon County have stood for millennia. The hollows have deepened over geological ages. Whatever walks in those remote places, whatever waits in the darkness of certain caves, whatever relocates stone markers and leaves food at the edge of researchers' camps, it was there long before us and will likely remain long after. The story of the 1903 disappearances and all those that followed may simply be the story of human intrusion into places where we were never meant to go, of boundaries crossed that were established for our protection rather than our restriction, of doors opened that were closed for a reason. The most telling statement comes from Walter Kincaid's final journal entry, written shortly before he vanished into the landscape he had sought to understand. I understand now why some stories shouldn't be told, why some doors shouldn't be opened. Those who disappeared in the Ozarks may have learned this truth too late. Those who search for them risk the same fate, and those who merely tell their stories must hope that words alone are not enough to attract unwanted attention. For as the residents of Shannon County seem to understand, without needing to be told, some secrets are kept not through active concealment, but through the consequences that befall those who discover them. In the century since the first documented disappearances, perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Shannon County mystery is how effectively it has resisted modern investigation. In an age when satellite imagery can reveal ancient structures hidden beneath jungle canopies, when DNA testing can identify remains decades old, when digital technology allows us to explore the deepest oceans and most remote mountain peaks, the hollows of the Ozarks still keep their secrets. The land still swallows people without a trace. The stones still stand in their circles, half buried by time, but undiminished in whatever purpose they serve. The symbols still mark cave walls in places that appear on no official map, and those who go looking for answers still sometimes fail to return. If you find yourself traveling through Shannon County, stick to the marked trails. Enjoy the rivers and the forests and the magnificent bluffs. Take photographs of the landscape, but perhaps not of any unusual stone formations you might encounter. And if, while hiking in the backcountry, you happen upon a narrow hollow where the birds fall silent, where the air turns suddenly cold despite the summer heat, where sounds seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, turn around, go back, the way you came. Some doors are meant to remain closed, some thresholds are not meant to be crossed, and some stories, like this one, are best left unfinished, floating like whispers through the hollows, warning those who would listen that some mysteries demand a price too steep for mere curiosity to pay. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Support us for more content like this.